There's a lot to catch up with in the news, and particularly in Prime Minister's questions. So, Prime Minister's questions was dominated by the Israeli-Gaza conflict, and Stephen Flynn, the SNP spokesperson, the leader of the SNP, stood up and, without notes, I mean, he's a very confident speaker, uh, outlined exactly the position which any reasonable person, I think, should be taking to condemn the Hamas terrorism, to applaud the Israeli state, and to urge moderation, and then to call for a ceasefire. In response, Rishi Sunak said that he has got assurances from the Israeli Prime Minister, from Netanyahu, that the Israeli armed forces will be acting within international law and within those constraints, and therefore will be doing their best to avoid causing harm to civilians. Well, this is the problem. Civilians are greatly harmed, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also in the 2 miles around the Lebanon border, and around the border of Gaza, where Israelis have been forced to leave their homes. The immediate move to war and to active siege may well be within the broader terms of international law, but it fails the test of a just war. It fails the test absolutely, because it has not exhausted all the possible avenues of negotiation, the possible avenues, and it is not a proportionate response. More than that, it allows for other players, like, for example, Islamic Jihad, to antagonize the situation further, to confuse the situation further, and to lead to further deaths and harm. So it doesn't matter whether Israel was responsible for the missile that hit the Hamas hospital, the Baptist hospital, or whether it was Islamic Jihad, or whether it was Hamas, whether the hospital was stocked with weapons or whatever. So many people lost their lives, so many people were wounded, so many people live in fear because of the Israeli siege. And I think Flynn's call and the SNP call for an immediate ceasefire, for a clear opportunity for people to leave the area where the Israelis intend to search, that is a perfectly reasonable request and a perfectly reasonable proposal to be made of the international community. And if the international community is dithering, as Sunak is dithering, then there's no possibility of that request going forward. There's no possibility of that being enforced. And it doesn't seem to matter, as far as I can see, to Israel's military plans, whether they have a ceasefire and then begin their military actions on the ground, or whether they begin them straight away. The reality is that Hamas has embedded itself into the civilian population, and many of the Hamas members will already have moved with the Gazan citizens to the south, and they will have used Israel's heavy-handed response as a way to recruit further young men to their cause and to this obsession with death and conflict. I think there has to be another way. I think, once again, our present government confuses a problem with a solution. The solution which has been presented is not necessarily the only solution to the problem, and actually is the least appropriate and least successful solution on offer. Netanyahu's solution is the solution of a thug. And while I am very supportive of Israel, while I am very supportive of any country that has been invaded, I can't support this thuggish and thoughtless knee-jerk response. It's simply not possible. On the subject of knee-jerk responses, have you picked up the rather brilliant exchange between Tom Tugendhat and Andrew Marr on LBC? And Tom Tugendhat is forced into a position where he's trying to rein back on Suella Braverman's dictum that people waving the Palestinian flag will be hounded down and arrested. And Tom Tugendhat says, well, it's within the context of provoking a response. And if waving a flag leads to a problem, effectively, the idea that we cannot have an Israeli flag, the idea that we cannot have a British flag or a Palestinian flag is simply absurd. These are bits of material. They represent nations. The idea that we shouldn't be waving a Hamas flag is sound, but that's not, of course, what Suella Braverman said. Suella Braverman, once again, is having to be corrected by other ministers because of her lack of preparation and because of her disjointed and incoherent and largely ill-tempered language. Other ministers are having to come in and sort out the mess that she makes, as ever, and yet she's sitting next to the Prime Minister. What does that say about the focus of our government?